Where states are trying to make themselves unlivable for Democrats? Yeah, that's how they maintain power. If you make conditions so bad for marginalized groups in your state, well, then those groups will start to flee. And then the people that support those groups will start to flee, because then they also get caught in the crossfire as being sympathetic to those marginalized groups. The idea is to further atomize and polarize the parties in this country at a state level, which solidifies legislative political power for the Republicans. At the same time, Republicans will simultaneously attack democracy itself within those states by gerrymandering the district maps and making it nearly impossible for Democrats to win, suppressing the vote. So the people that remain there that might still oppose the regime can't really make much of a political difference through electoral means. So then they have complete control over these states. They institute the most fucking draconian laws possible, hurt everybody but wealthy people who own capital. And then you slowly but surely tear the country apart on the basis of blue and red states. Wait, literally, what does this mean? This is a high progresso quote tweet of Idamel Chong, resident of Malaysia, who just happens to have a fixation on American politics, and also American politics as it pertains to minor children. Trump has become so desperate and envious that he's now attacking Ron DeSantis and Elon Musk from the left by posting an AI video on Instagram where they're both on the same panel as Adolf Hitler, George Soros, and Klaus Schwab. What? He's attacking him from the right, dumbass. Trump is attacking DeSantis and Elon Musk from the right. He's saying that he's further to the right than them because Trump doesn't associate with George Soros, which is the main, contemporary figure that Republicans are talking about, because I'm never hearing them talk about Schwab, and they pretend not to like Hitler, but they don't really bring him up that much unless they're trying to pretend like he was a leftist or something. So, Trump is literally like, no, I am more far right than Ron DeSantis, actually, is what he's saying here. Holy fuck. How are you in this much of a bubble? Seeing Soros and Hitler as to the left? Well, that's what they'll do. Because that was the entire point of Hitler calling the Nazi Party the National Socialist Party, was to ape the aesthetics of being pro-worker and left-leaning to dupe people into supporting his fucking political program. That was the entire point, and these dumbasses fall for it in the year of our Lord 2023. The thing is that they know they're lying. The thing is that they understand that that was the case, but they're pretending still, because they want to be able to associate the fucking Nazi Party with the left, even though it's very obviously a far right-wing ideology. Nazism and fascism. Which is why when a motherfucker runs a U-Haul into the fence at the White House, and there happens to be a swastika flag in it, they have to say that it's a false flag that's framing conservatives in America, even though in the past they would have just denounced it and said they denounced Nazism. But now they don't denounce it anymore. They just say it wasn't actually a real Nazi, because they're kind of aware that they're on the same side as the Nazis. Everybody on the left, whenever a Nazi does some shit, we're like, yeah, fuck Nazis, that shit sucks. These people belong literally in jail. A civil society should not be able to tolerate Nazis. You do not have a civil society if you do tolerate Nazis, because it's an inherently violent ideology. But on the right, they're like, oh, it's a false flag. They're trying to frame us. It's not Nazi Germany anymore. It's not the 1940s and 30s anymore. Very dumb. I hope so, City RCH. It's not very good that the right wing in this country, the one of two major political parties in this country, has shifted their rhetoric to no longer denounce open Nazis. That's a bit worrying. When will America elect a third party as president? Once we've gotten a proportional voting system instead of first past the post, which is the voting system we currently have, which makes third parties mathematically non-viable. There's a lot of work to be done getting a proportional voting system like ranked choice voting into the local, then state, and then federal level. And you would likely have to do it along the lines of something like cannabis legalization, where you get it at a bunch of local and state levels, and then you get enough states so where you just get it federally, which we still haven't even achieved fully for cannabis. But that would be the idea. Because it's less likely that there's just a straight up, yep, this is what we're doing federally and in every single state. That's not happening. Few states have adopted ranked choice already. Yeah, Alaska, Maine, I believe. And it depends as well for what election you're talking about. Sarah Palin was really mad about losing her recent election, I think for the Senate or the House, because of ranked choice voting. Because obviously Republicans are less likely to win if you have a more fair electoral system. Yeah, more and more right-wing figures have been openly talking about how we shouldn't have democracy. And not just in the usual way where they're like, oh, well, we live in a constitutional republic, not a democracy, but like literally opposed to people voting. It's not good. So simultaneously, their rhetoric has shifted on that, in that they are openly anti-democracy, and their rhetoric has shifted in that they no longer denounce Nazis. They just claim that whatever Nazi did a bad thing, that wasn't actually a Nazi because it makes the Republicans and the right-wingers look bad, if it was, because they're kind of aware that they're on the side of the Nazis. I will say, not every Republican voter is a Nazi, but every Nazi votes Republican. Oh yeah, Raven, no. They don't want women to be able to vote. The Founding Fathers also didn't want women to vote. It wasn't legal for women to vote when this country was formed. It also wasn't legal for poor white men to vote. You had to own land. But somehow, some way, the Founding Fathers had the foresight to construct a document called the Constitution that could be amended into the future. And now, women have the right to vote. Poor white men even have the right to vote. And we all know that that is the most marginalized demographic of people. The white man. How times have changed. For the jailed people for voting, yeah, they confused people because of, I think it was a ballot initiative that was passed that allowed for people, like felons, like that were released for a certain amount of time to be able to vote or whatever. And they were told literally by the state that they could vote, and then they did vote, and then they were told that they couldn't vote after they'd already done it, and they got in trouble even though they were told they could vote, and it was a bunch of shit. I don't know what happened about that. All I know is that the continued existence of the Republican Party having any amount of political power whatsoever is a threat to literally everybody in this country and also the world, because this country has a lot of influence on what happens in the rest of the world. If you're looking toward who's ruining the United States of America, it's usually going to be the people talking about the fact that America is being ruined by, gay people and women being able to vote and also make their own decisions about their family planning. Like, this country cannot survive the continued political relevancy of the Republican Party. They just can't. And we're seeing the cracks from that. That's why I look at policies, Claria. What policy does either side support? Well, the Republican Party, the major policies they support are currently oppressing queer people through criminalizing people using the restroom, criminalizing people, even adults, getting gender-affirming care in the form of hormones, or even criminalizing social transition, just changing your name, pronouns, wearing gender non-conforming quote-unquote clothing. Their policy also seems to be cutting taxes for the wealthy and deregulating multinational corporations so that those wealthy corpos make more money. Which has a lot of negative effects for the workers that produce the wealth that those corpos enjoy. And also, the deregulation allows for the workers to work for less money and more hours, and in unsafe work conditions. I think that's bad. Republicans are also in favor of limiting the amount of speech that you're allowed to have. They don't like it when you talk bad about them online. Ron DeSantis is actually trying to make it so that you would have to register with the state if you were going to be critical of him online. Also, the banning of books at a variety of levels, like if they teach like the actual history of this country, rather than the mythologized version that Republicans have to believe in order to cope. A whole bunch of stuff. Whereas the Democratic Party is slightly better. And they're actively being pushed in some small ways, not enough, of course, but there are more progressive people in the Democratic Party. This is the other party that's actually viable mathematically in this country, toward a direction that I'm more in favor of, where they are at least okay with queer people existing, and in some instances are actively pushing against queer existence being criminalized. It was progressives, of course, who fought to codify gay marriage into law, who fought to make illegal anti-sodomy laws, who fought to try to get Roe v. Wade to be the law of the land and allow for women and people with the capacity to give birth to have access to an abortion so they can plan their own families and have their bodily autonomy. It was progressives who fought for the $15 minimum wage, which is now a major Democratic Party talking point, which doesn't go far enough in my opinion, but is still better than nothing. The Democratic Party is currently also a little bit better on unions now, which allows for people in their workplaces to collectively organize and bargain for better working conditions and wages with their bosses, rather than begging individually, which would ideally increase the quality of life of workers under those corporations. Also in favor of people having more access to healthcare and expanding Medicare here and there. But like a lot of the Democratic Party shit doesn't go far enough, but it's certainly better than the alternative, which is literally the only thing they have going for them. Because the first past the post voting system only allows for two major parties to be mathematically viable, those being the Democratic and Republican parties, the Democratic Party benefits from the abusive relationship that it has with reasonable people in this country. Because the alternative is a lot worse. They understand that the only other option is the Democrats, so they benefit from not having to do a whole lot to get people to vote for them because they're not the Republicans. It's an abusive relationship. It's not good, and I want to see it change. You change it with a proportional voting system, moving away from first past the post. Third parties become viable, they start gaining power, they start pushing the Democrats to work a little harder to get the votes of people, without the spoiler effect that leads to only two parties being viable in the first past the post system. Whole bunch of shit. Generally speaking, Republicans hate you, want you to suffer and die, so that corporations can squeeze more money out of you in the form of your labor, the time you sell, in order to get your meager wages. And the Democrats still allow for that, but they give you a little bit of help. Choice is easy, in my opinion. The idea is that you try to push the Democratic Party as far as you can toward your ideals, which in this case is toward the left. It's not incredibly easy, but it has happened. Bernie Sanders' presidential run in 2016 has made a lot of these things that were previously outside of the realm of thought in the Democratic Party, like allowing people to unionize and passing union protections, like a $15 minimum wage, like expanding Medicare. A whole bunch of things that were previously thought unheard of in the Democratic Party are now actually becoming major talking points that even Biden feels like he has to talk about. Now, if they actually get it into practice, it's a different story, but there's only so much you can do. And this is all just talking about the electoral system. Electoralism. There are things you could do outside of it as well. By and large, though, simply casting a vote for the least bad option, in this case the Democratic Party, is going to be a lot easier for most people than actively organizing and participating in their community more than simply existing. Of course, there's a lot of voter suppression that goes on, and if you have to work a lot of hours or you have a lot of dependents you have to worry about, it might be difficult to take out time to vote. But if that's a difficulty that you have, you're going to have even less time to engage in community organizing and mutual aid. So the very least civic engagement that anybody should ever engage in, which is better than nothing, is going to be voting for the least bad option. But of course, you should be doing more if you can. Yeah, I fear Marianne Williamson will not be as effective, because I don't know if the DNC is even going to be having debates. The big reason Bernie was able to be effective was that there were debates in 2016 and 2020 that he could participate in. But it's looking like the DNC doesn't really care to have debates. And the reason being is that I think historically speaking, incumbent presidents that get primaried tend to fare worse in the general. So once again, the abusive relationship that we have with the Democratic Party, we being people further to the left in the Democratic Party, is that I wouldn't like Ron DeSantis or Trump to win. I think that would be quite bad, actually. I would prefer that Biden won if he's going to be the nominee. So if we have to do things to make sure that happens, this is where you're going to have to start weighing your options as people further to the left, which is, of course, assuming you have any amount of power to change what the DNC is going to do. But I can understand their thought process even if I don't necessarily agree with it. Preferential voting ever going to happen in the US? I mean, ideally a proportional voting system will. There are some states that allow for it in certain elections, like Maine and Alaska. The idea being you try to get as many states to do it at the local and then statewide level. And then eventually so many of them are doing it that you have a better argument for doing it federally. But that's a lot of hard work that has to be done in these individual states first. It is unlikely that any Democratic president will ever just fight for it to happen through legislation. And then it would be even harder for the legislation to pass through the House and the Senate because both the Democrats and Republicans benefit from the first past the post system. The Republican Party would be completely and totally obsolete in a proportional voting system. They benefit the most from the two-party system because they are completely unpopular. They haven't won a popular vote in a long time. But they have the Electoral College, which is a participation trophy, which allows them to still win every now and again. The executive branch. And the Democrats aren't going to do it either, even though they're the party most likely to do it, which is still a very slim possibility, because they also benefit from the two-party system. A similar thing happened in Canada under Trudeau, I believe, where Trudeau ran on reforming the electoral system, which theirs in Canada is actually better than ours. But he ran on making it a more democratic process and allowing for additional parties to have a better chance. But then he and his party realized that that would make it less likely for them to win again in the future, so they were like, we're not going to do that, actually. because people will follow their self-interests. And if your interest is retaining the political power you have, you're not going to do anything that makes it less likely for you to retain it. You need a person in power who actually gives a shit that would push for that, and then you would have to try to get it through the House and the Senate, which is an even harder ask than having a president, say they're in favor of it. So the state by state strategy is an easier option, because it's going to be the easiest to get it locally for local elections, and then ideally you use that energy that you have from the local elections and the fact that you can get polling for if people enjoy that voting system. You have a better argument for getting it statewide, and then you get enough states together, eventually enough of them are doing it, and then you have a better argument for doing it federally. It's a whole bunch of shit. Life's a bitch and then you die is really what's going on here. But you have to try your best. Work with people to try to make it a little bit less of a bitch. Thank you very much for watching for the Prime sub for 5 months, and welcome back to the Primers Association. Hope you'll enjoy your stay. Conure. Look. Looking at old Republicans, they weren't this transphobic and extreme in general. How old? And also, the medical research and capability that we have for HRT and also sexual reassignment surgery shit has advanced since, depending on what time period you're talking about. It's become more of a noticeable thing. It's the double-edged sword of a minority group, and the plight of said minority group getting more attention is that you'll get more attention, more people will become aware of you and the struggles you face. And then people who think you shouldn't struggle so much and are in favor of your liberation from that struggle will start to fight for you. But also the people that want to keep you in that marginalized position will be like, oh, people are actually fighting for these people to have more rights. Because I'm a Republican, I'm against people having individual liberty and bodily autonomy because it makes me feel bad. So I'm going to do something about that. And now you have literally the major Republican Party talking point is trans issues and if trans people should be allowed to exist or not. It's a double-edged sword. And I'm so excited to be the marginalized group that is at the center of that as a trans person. It's so fun. Really good for the mental state. And of course, because this is not a binary game, there's an intersectional analysis here, where the Republican Party, who seeks to oppress everybody that isn't a cisgender, heterosexual white man who has money, isn't poor, is also actively trying to oppress a variety of other marginalized identities. It's just that currently, in terms of political rhetoric, trans people are at the top of the docket for oppression, especially when you look at the bills being proposed and passed by Republicans. So, that's not fun, but it also affects other marginalized groups that the Republicans seek to oppress as well, like black and brown people, the poor, gay people, because contrary to popular belief, not only are gender and sex two different things, but your gender identity and your sexuality are also two different things. Now, often they reference each other, and you can make educated guesses about somebody's sexuality based off their gender identity, or somebody's gender identity based off their biological sex, but it's not exactly one-to-one. Oh yeah, of course, disabled people. The Republicans love making their life harder. One of the greatest Republican Party analogs we've ever had in history, in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, called disabled people a drain on the economic system and justified their removal from society because of that. The primary target of the time was Jewish people, of course, but they also were targeting people with disability, the elderly even. Queer people. Not that long ago, a Republican was suggesting grandparents die for the economy via COVID. Yeah. The greatest historical comparison to the Republican Party, Germany of the 1930s and 40s. You can just look to them and you kind of have an idea of what the modern Republican Party is trying to do. Oh yeah, Raven. No, Republicans love child abuse. They're a big fan of it, actually. They propose policies that make it more likely to happen, and they oppose policies that make it less likely to happen. Pedocon theory is a theory like gravity is a theory. Just look at the Catholic Church in Illinois in recent headlines to learn more and see that the leading members of the Republican Party have had shit to say about it, even though their biggest talking point currently is protecting children. They also love child labor. Well, you repeat yourself. Child labor is just child abuse. There is literally no reason to have child labor. Children should be going to school and learning. Now, of course, if, you get into high school and you're like, yeah, I don't think college is for me. I think I would like to go into a trade, actually, and be an electrician or be a mechanic. And there are ways you can, work a job in those fields. I went to a high school, and there were people in my high school that would, leave school early in, their junior and senior year of high school that would leave school early and then go to work. Ideally, you would go to college and whatnot, but if that's the path that you wish to choose, and you think it's better for you, and you genuinely enjoy the work you're doing, and ideally, my policies go into place, you get paid well for it, you get good benefits for going to work, then that's fine. But there's literally no reason for fucking children to go into the workforce. They make children work for even longer hours than adults, in fact, for less pay. Well, yeah, it's because it's easier to exploit the labor of children in the same way that it's easier to exploit the labor of migrants, of immigrants. So the reason why a lot of corporations will prefer to hire an illegal immigrant is because an illegal immigrant will never ask for a raise. If they do, the boss will just call ICE and get them deported. You can't do that with a natural-born citizen. Or, a citizen who's gone through the process and is an actual citizen of the country. If those people ask for a raise, you could still, fire them if you have, at-will hiring process. Or just say no. Because we don't have a lot of labor protections in this country, it's going to be hard to do anything about that unless you have a union, where you can get all your workers that you work with together and ask for everybody to get a raise in better conditions. But individually speaking, it's going to be harder to exploit the labor of a citizen, naturally born or otherwise, than it is a immigrant worker, because you can't threaten a citizen of this country with deportation. Much the same way that if you have literal child labor, children are not at a intellectual capacity to understand literally anything I'm talking about right now. So they're not going to understand if they're being exploited in their labor. They're not going to understand that, I shouldn't be working at all, for one, and for two, if I am being forced to work, I should be making more money. I should be getting less hours. I should be getting better benefits for doing this, even though I shouldn't be doing it at all, because I'm a fucking child. They're not going to be able to do that, so it's going to be easier to exploit them in that way. And that is the same for all other kinds of abuse as well. Coincidentally, the Republican Party also opposes comprehensive sex ed in school, which studies have shown actually reduces the rates of child abuse or increases the reporting of child abuse, because children who go through a comprehensive sexual education course in the clinical setting of a fucking classroom end up understanding if they're getting abused or not. And then they're able to report it to the authorities and get the abuser to, face justice. But, Republicans not a big fan of making child abuse happen less, so they oppose that. So it's the same in terms of child labor, of making children work jobs. But like I say, this country cannot survive the continued political relevance and power of the Republican Party. The Republican Party is anathema, is contradictory to the continued civil existence of this country. They cannot coexist. Does it mean there's no hopium left? Not necessarily, no. It depends, really. If you look at Minnesota, in the most recent legislative session, Minnesota's actually been popping the fuck off with a 1-vote lead in their legislature. And Minnesota's actually passed a lot of really good legislation with that single vote lead, single vote majority. They've made it a refugee state for trans people, for instance, and will not comply with extradition requests from other states for people who are fleeing. They've made it against the law illegal to allow for white supremacists to be police officers. They've codified the right to an abortion into law, so that even if they lose control of the legislature, it becomes infinitely harder for Republicans to make abortion illegal. They've instituted free school lunch at the state level. They're actually feeding children. And of course, Republicans oppose that as well. They've strengthened union protections and the ability for people to unionize. And this is all just shit that I can remember off the top of my head. A lot of good shit. Governor Tim Walz and the Democrats in the legislature. And that's with a 1-vote majority. Minnesota's supposed to be a purple state. They had a 1-vote majority. That's not a lot. There's a variety of solidly blue states with super majorities for the Democrats that don't have nearly as good of legislative track record. What's lacking is political will. Yeah, I don't know about that, Anarchist. Listen, whatever works. Aren't the trends the opposite, though? In that Democrats are actively fleeing red states? Red states are trying to make themselves unlivable for Democrats? Yeah, that's how they maintain power. If you make conditions so bad for marginalized groups in your state, well, then those groups will start to flee. And then the people that support those groups will start to flee. Because then they also get caught in the crossfire as being sympathetic to those marginalized groups. And then you've solidified control for the party that is causing people to flee that state. And therein lies the problem, right? Because, I've been asked by people who live in these red states, say, for instance, I'm a trans person in Florida. I feel like I should leave, but part of me wants to stay and fight. And it is really a difficult situation to be in. My general take is going to be you should get the fuck out of there. And of course, it's not easy. And people, generally speaking, aren't going to want to do it outside of their literal existence being threatened. But if you have the ability, probably a good idea to get the fuck out. That said, if there are people that are going to be staying in these states to fight, the best candidates for doing so are going to be people that are not the target, right? So say you're a trans person fleeing anti-trans laws in a state, well then cisgender people sticking around and people who are not, directly impacted by those laws sticking around and trying to fight against them, not a bad play. Because those people are going to be the safest doing so. But you're not bulletproof. Because they can get you on other things. They can get you on being a sympathizer. They can get you on your political opinions. So you're not bulletproof, but it's certainly going to be safer for you. But that's the idea. The idea is to further atomize and polarize the parties in this country at a state level. So force all the Democrats to flee out of red states and into blue states because of unlivable conditions, and keep the meat grinder going within the states for those people who can't flee, and all the other people who are not directly targeted but still suffering because nobody prospers under Republican leadership other than the mega wealthy. Even cisgender, heterosexual white men, if you're poor, you are suffering under Republican rule because they don't advocate for raising your pay, because they don't advocate for giving you better working conditions, because they stand against you being able to bargain for better wages in your workplace. They hate you too. They're just, throwing you red meat by, propagandizing to you to make you hate a variety of people that aren't looking like you in order to get you to vote for them. But anyway, further polarize the nation at a statewide level by moving all the Democrats into blue states and having them flee red states, which solidifies legislative political power for the Republicans, because there's going to be less people opposing them at the voting booth. At the same time, Republicans will simultaneously attack democracy itself within those states by gerrymandering the district maps and making it nearly impossible for Democrats to win, by suppressing the vote, because historically speaking, if you look at voting trends, the more people, the higher the voter turnout is, the more likely Democrats are to win. The lower voter turnout is, the more likely Republicans are to win. They've said this themselves. They advocate constantly for limiting the amount of people who can vote because they understand that fact. So the people that remain there that might still oppose the regime can't really make much of a political difference through electoral means, which is not to say there aren't means outside of that, but we're talking about electoralism currently. So then they have complete control over these states. They institute the most fucking draconian laws possible, hurt everybody but wealthy people who own capital. And then you slowly but surely tear the country apart, the union apart, on the basis of blue and red states. For as much as Republicans talk about, we need to come together and compromise, which they don't really talk about anymore, but they used to. Democrats are still fucking stupid and use that kind of rhetoric, even though it's foolish and naive, because Republicans want nothing to do with compromise. They want authoritarian rule. They are the ones, the Republicans, actively trying to split this party along party lines as much and as strongly as possible. So then you have these red states and blue states going up against each other, and geographically speaking, if you look at a map, of course there's a lot of land there, and there aren't a lot of people. There's going to be more people in blue states, generally speaking, because those are the states that are going to have the big cities, because big cities tend to be more likely to vote blue, because big cities have a more wide-ranging amount of people in them, which makes people less bigoted, which makes people understand the plight of their fellow worker more, and all this kind of shit. They end up being more progressive and going toward the more progressive party, which are the Democrats who are not good enough, or whatever. And you get the setup for the South rising again, if you will. Civil War II Electric Boogaloo. The reason why they keep those statues of the traitorous fucking murderers of their own countrymen, the Confederate generals, up in their states. They want to return to that. They are still in favor of the Civil War. They just lost it. They want to try again. That's why they want their base to be as militarized as possible, why they give them easy access to firearms, why they make them scared of everyone around them so that they stockpile these firearms and are incredibly dangerous and violent and ready to act on the smallest provocations in a violent capacity. They want a do-over of the Civil War. They want to win it this time, even though they got fucking embarrassed last time. And they want the ideals of the Confederacy, which at the time, literally the document that was written during the South attempting to secede and form the Confederacy, was literally because they wanted to keep their slaves. That was literally in the secession document that was drafted by the Confederates. The reason why the first Civil War happened was because slavery was being abolished. Now, not entirely. The 13th Amendment still allows for slaves if you're convicted of a crime. And, not just, black people at this point are being convicted of crime, so you actually start enslaving, usually poorer white people. It's kind of a better arrangement with less political stigma attached to it. That needs to be addressed. But anyway, seems like black and brown communities are heavily policed and are targeted more and end up going to jail for the same crimes as white people at higher rates and for longer. So, essentially, all you need to know about what the end goal is for the Republican Party in this country, if they should take authoritarian control, would be if the Confederacy actually won in the Civil War. Because they want the second one to happen if they can't get a judicial coup, which is what they're currently going after. When it comes to using the Supreme Court and legislating from the bench, using courts at every level below it, and legislating from the bench for conservatives that way, all else fails, they will get violent if they have to, more violent than they already are. Anyway, I've talked about all this before. I don't know why I'm still rambling about it. Not going to change anything. But if you hadn't thought of it that way, maybe you have. Now, I don't know. And the Democrats are much better. Let me remind you. I've said that many times in this ramble. They are not much better, and I want a hostile takeover of that godforsaken party if we have a first-past-the-post system and then the only other one that's viable. A hostile takeover of it by leftists and progressives, but, we're working on that, kind of. We're making some gains. But they're better than the alternative, which they're very happy to take advantage of. Minnesota is proof that the party is shitty by choice. True. And I didn't even fucking ramble about wage slavery. You can look up Frederick Douglass, famous abolitionist, and his words on wage slavery if you want. You don't have to listen to it from a white. Excuse me. Anyway, I enjoy shouting into the void every now and again, so that was fun. This video's got a call it as Moist Moose. Thanks for the support. Appreciate it very much. Keep on keeping on. If you'd like to be the next Connor call, all you can do is follow me on Twitter @ConnorCC. Reach my video links on the left. Remember to subscribe to the channel. Put all notifications on and hit the bell. Leave a like if you like. Comment something shouting into the void yourself down below, and have a good day.